start, let's look at what is a framework and how is it different from the library. So we will be using this word framework for a long time. That is, almost all units are based on the frameworks. So we must know what is the essential difference between a library and a framework. In the last class, that is yesterday, I have shown you how to add a library, that is JSTL, into your project. But from the next class onwards, at least during the theory class, we will be concentrating on framework. So what is the essential difference between a library and a framework? If you look at a library, library is a set of classes. Now we have used a library for adding. You're so excited. Okay. When I talk about, when we say it's a library, it is a set of classes. For example, right from the beginning, when you started writing the programs, you started with including something in your C program. Even though C was not a object-oriented paradigm, we were using libraries. For example, you included yesterday io.h, and somebody said that's a library that is required for input-output operation. And after some time, you included math.h, and you learned that that library is meant for mathematics functionalities like sine, cos, square root, and all the functionality if you require. And if you don't want to write those functions, they are readily available. Then when it came to the Java, you included the classes. For example, you included the package like swing, AWT, when you develop the applet and when you develop the GUI application, and so on. So what you were getting when you included a library is you got some additional functions and some additional methods, or maybe some additional classes which had the functions and method. Then what you did was you took those classes, you called the methods within that classes, or you called a function, and it did some work, returned a value back to you, and you proceeded with your work. So your code was calling some of the functions or some of the methods which were available elsewhere. That was the idea that you had in the library. So when it comes to the framework, what is the difference? How the framework is different from the library? When we talk about a framework, no doubt framework has libraries inside it. Framework has method inside it, but it's a full-fledged application. So it's like a template that is given to you. It has the methods as well as it has its own behavior. So what does that mean? It means to say, in a simple word, it means to say that you are going to call something, your method, but the difference here is you write your business method and the framework will call your method. So what is the shift now? In the olden days, you used to call the functions and methods in the library. Now it's exactly opposite one. The framework will call your method. At appropriate place, framework will call the methods within your application. I have given you a slight hint about this when I talked about the life cycle of a servlet. You have realized when you are writing the program, the life cycle of a servlet contains init, service, destroy, and these methods are called at appropriate place by the container. So I told you that. So when you initialize it, during the initialization it will call it. During the service method it will call one method. During the destruction it will call one method. You realize that it is calling, you are not calling. It will call that method. If you have written any statement within that method, those steps will be executed. And that's the essential difference between a framework and a library. So in library, you are calling the methods of the library. For example, you call math.sign, math.cos or math.square root or anything. You call it. Whereas in the framework, it's exactly opposite. It will try to call your methods. So that is the difference. So framework code calls your method. So the framework knows what has to be done. It knows how to behave. At appropriate places, it will call your method. So it will do its own work. In between, it will come and call your method. And that is the essential difference. So in the library, the module that you call, you call the module from the code, whereas the framework module will call your code. And this is called as inversion of control. What's the meaning of saying inversion of control? Is you are no longer in control of the entire application. So when you wrote your application maybe in your last semester, you were in total control of what functions has to be called and what method has to be called, because you have written them in step by step. So you knew that main, static void main will be called first. Then onwards, the control is in your hand and you can do anything that you please. But here, it's not possible. Somewhere the application will start, in between it will just come and call your methods. So that is called as inversion. The control is given to the framework, and the framework, when it requires, when it places, it just calls your method. Okay. In other words, framework has an impact how you write the program. So the structure of your application is decided by the framework. So you are given an empty structure in which it is trying to call. The methods are already connected. It knows how to go about it, how to start and where to end. In between, some places are left blank and you are supposed to fill in those blank spaces. So your code, somewhere they have given a slot and they have said that you write your code here. At appropriate place, we come to that location, we call this, and we will go to some other places. Okay. So the difference that you have seen is when you call a library, most of the time libraries are utilities. For example, you have used socket programming, so at least you know that some utilities you are going to get it. Whereas when it comes to the framework, it is library plus the runtime environment, the exact full environment. Now let's look at one of the example. We are going to see this framework, if not today, after some time. That's the struts framework. If you look at the struts framework, it's based on the servlet. Now, if you have realized, in the last lab, when I was giving you a demo, suddenly a strange thing happened. I wanted to increment the counter to 1, 2, 3, 4, and it so happened that I have, by mistake, I have put a space in the input field, that is the hidden field. And during the conversion, when I try to convert it into an integer, the integer dot parse failed altogether. It raised an exception and nothing came on the screen. The page was completely blank. Then I went back and then corrected the program. This is because I was doing everything on my own. Suppose if you use the struts framework, what that struts framework will do? You have to tell the struts framework, I want so many inputs. I want integer, I want string, I want all those things. Get this input from the user and put it into a class. It will do it for you. You don't have to write any code for that. So when the customer says, say register number, if the register number is not integer, what you have to do is you have to handle a try catch exception and maybe raise your own error or exception and tell the user that register number has to be integer or has to be numeric. You can type text in the register number. So this is if you were hard coding it on your own. If you are using struts, what will happen? If there is an exception, if it is not able to convert the input register number into a integer or a long, it will raise an exception and it will show the error message on its own to the user. So you don't have to write that code on your own. It's already built into the framework. Then what is that you are supposed to do? You are supposed to take that integer values which will be stored in a class as a member variable, get them and tell the struts where to place them, where to store them, which is the table where you are supposed to put it on the where is the database and so on. That information you have to give. Rest of the things will be automatically taken care by the struts. So what is the difference? You don't have to write the code and tell that, okay, this is how you have to get the integer, this is how you have to raise the exception. That is already handled. You have to just tell the struts that where is the database and which field has to be populated with the given input values. So your code is a part of something else now. You are not writing the main code as such. Somewhere somebody has already written some main code which is already working on its own. You are just adding a few things. So that is what is the framework. So in other words, if you use the framework, you will be able to code the things much faster because already many things are there in place. Otherwise, you have to write the entire thing, test it, debug it, correct it, and then go to the next step. Almost most of the things are already available. Only the business logic, the specific logic that you want to use in the business. For example, how do you calculate the average of marks? It will, if you ask the struts, it will read the marks. It will convert it to integer. If it is not possible to convert the marks into integer, it will raise an exception. It will show everything. It will, if everything goes fine, it's going to read all the 5 marks or 6 marks or 10 marks. How to calculate the average or how to calculate the GPA? That logic you have to write because it is not part of these struts. Or how do you calculate the net salary and the total salary of the employee? So you know that salary is equal to basic plus GA plus HRA and something. Some equations are there or some mathematics is involved. That thing you are supposed to handle it. Rest of the things are automatically handled by the framework. So if you want to define a framework is a set of prefabricated software building block. So it is already in place, prefabricated. Okay. What your programmers can do? A programmers can extend, use it as it is, extend the functionality or customize the existing functionalities to suit their requirement. So you are getting everything already fitted. What you need to do is wherever required, you have to modify the things. Either make some changes or add additional things to the existing one. Okay, that is what is the framework. So in other words, you have, when you learnt about the object-oriented programming, one of the plus point of the object-oriented programming is you have studied that it can be reused. So where do you reuse it? In the framework. So framework is the best example wherein you are reusing your code. Okay. One other analogy, very simple analogy, that if you want to ride on a car, so or ride on a motorbike or drive a car, what you are going to do? What's the best option that you have? You have two options. Either go to a showroom, search, buy a bike that suits your requirement, your budget, and maybe you are comfortable with it, or go to a automobile spare shop, get each and every piece of it, get the tires, get the handle, get the headlight, get the engine, get the silencer, everything of your choice. You go, and how you pick your t-shirt and maybe the cloth, you go there. Either you go to a tailor and ask the tailor to stitch, or you go a ready-made one, you get it, and if the length is not proper, you go to a tailor. Either you do it on your own or give it to a tailor. They will make some adjustment. And this is the essential difference between a library and a framework. So when I say it's a framework, you get the full-fledged bike. If you go to a showroom, you get the bike. If you're not happy with its sticker or anything, you remove it and put a new one. If you're not happy, if you don't find a fancy lights on the bike, fit it. So that is customizing it. It is much easier to do that thing rather than going to a spare shop, automobile spare shop, and getting everything and then trying to fit each and every one. Okay? You may be able to get a bike of your choice, bike with all the tires, everything of your choice. If you buy a Yamaha or anything, you may not get everything that you wanted to have on that bike. But if you build a bike on your own, definitely everything that you want will be available. But what is the difference? Difference here is the time that you are going to spend and the effort that you are going to spend to build a bike on your own is not so appreciable than getting something and being happy with that. Okay, some part is not proper. Okay, I wanted it to give maybe 100 kilometers per liter. It's not giving. It's okay. Happy with it. Okay, some adjustment here and there. What's the advantage? You get everything ready-made. Wherever required, you can make the changes, and that is what is the framework. You get everything built into it. Wherever you are not happy, just change the code. Okay, in the bike, it may not be possible to change each and every pieces, but it's a software, and you know very well software. Anytime you can change it. If you're not happy with what it is doing, change it and add your own code. Now that is what is the advantage of using the framework. Okay, so what does the framework says? Okay, it describes what are the interfaces, how the control flows, and the contract between the different components. So it says how the input is taken, where the input will go, and where it is going to end. That is a life cycle. So the flow of control is already there. If you are not happy with the flow of control, you can change it on your own. You are free. It's a software altogether. And if you want to add something in between, it will say how to add the component. You can just insert something in between. Like if you take a bike, you can't just fit a silencer anywhere you want to do it. There are some places where you can fit it. So in other words, there is an interface. If you put a component in between, the interface must match. Okay, so that is the advantage. So this is one of the best example advantages. It can be reused. Okay, so you can reuse your component to build the or you can build your own component or reuse what you get. Okay. The other advantage of using the framework is you don't have to start everything from the scratch. It is simple as that. You don't have to read a book on the automobile engineering to ride on a bike or to change its light and other things. It's much easier if you get a bike and then make some changes to it. So as a developer, you don't have to start each and everything. Now, is this an advantage? Definitely it's an advantage. Now you take your own example. How much knowledge you have on security? How do you handle the security? You are asking username and password. So username and password has to be securely stored in some places so that the hackers will not be able to get those information or the credit card numbers. Are you familiar with all those concepts? How do you handle the authentication? You are not aware of it. So if there is already a ready-made code available which is already doing it, then your work is almost over. Okay? The framework will authenticate, framework will store it, you have to do the rest part. If the framework will say how to authenticate the user, you have to just say if the user is authorized or authenticated, what is the user is supposed to do? That part is your business logic. So you can just concentrate on your business logic rather than going in depth into how to do all the other unwanted things. So what's the advantage? You'll be able to rapidly build a application. So is this a plus point? For you it may not be a plus point. For any software company, it's a plus point. They will be able to develop the software much faster than going for things from the scratch. Most of the things are ready-made, available, already tried and tested. So it's much easier for them to develop it. So this is the difference between a library and a framework. It could be one of the questions for maybe at least the internals or any other place. What's the difference between a library and a framework? A library is a set of classes instantiated by the client. So you say, even though you are not instantiating math or any other classes, but imagine if you have something that you are trying to instantiate. So your code is doing. What about the framework? Framework already provides something. Either you use it or you extend it. You create a subclass out of it and use it. For example, you just created a subclass out of the servlet. The servlet that you have created was not a ordinary servlet. You extended it out of a HTTP servlet. So you're subclassing it. Okay. In the library, you are calling. The client calls the functions, whereas in the framework, the framework calls the functions of the client. So it is in control of what has to be done, when the things has to be done. Okay. The next one is there is no predefined flow of control. You are the one who is going to decide. You are going to say it will call the math function, it will call the AWT function. You are deciding it. Tomorrow, if you change your mind, you will change the steps. Whereas that's not the case. The steps are already, the flow of control is already defined. You have to write your code according to that. Okay. There is no predefined interaction between the components, whereas there is a definite agreement or the definite interfaces that will tell you how to interact. Okay. You don't get any default behavior in your code, because if you are in good mode, you write some code in one way. If you are in bad mode, you will write it in some other way. So your code behavior will not be standardized, whereas here the way in which the code behaves is already standardized. Okay. Let's look at the advantages. One is the time saving, because you are not starting everything from the scratch. You can save a lot of time, and because the structure is already there, the framework, the empty structure is already there, you don't have to redesign the structure of your application. The next one is, if you know what is a struts, and if you join a company as maybe a new student, or maybe you are doing internship, or as an experienced developer, you join there, you know where are the pieces, you know how the flow of control works. They don't have to teach you how the things are working. They don't have to tell you that code will start from here, it will go here, it will go here. That structure is already defined, so you know which area you are supposed to work on. So it's much easier. Okay. In other words, the programming style, the convention is already declared. You don't have to learn it again. What's the advantage again? So if you are joining as a fresher to the company, they don't have to give you a 6 months training and give you a free pay during that training period. So immediately you are absorbed. They say, do you know struts? Do you know Hibernate? Do you know Spring? That means you know how the things are working. And they will say, this is we are using the Spring framework. Are you comfortable with it? If you say yes, they know that you know the structure, how the Spring works. Then they will just tell you this business problem, what they are trying to do, on which section you will be working, and what you are supposed to do. You have to just code in that place. The rest of the things will work. Okay. So how do you know that thing? Because the structure of the program is already predefined by the framework. So if you take a Spring framework, how many folders must be there, how the things must be arranged, what is the naming convention that you are supposed to use, everything is predefined. So if you resign from this company and join some other company that is using Spring, you don't have to spend even 1 minute to look at how the application is written, because it has the same structure. Okay. The next one is convenient for debugging. Most of the frameworks come with their own tools for debugging. So it's much easier. If the things are not working, they will give you a good looking error message or the log file, which you can use it. And some of them will come with their own debugging tool, which will help you to easily track where is the problem and how to solve it. Now let's look at one of the framework that is constantly being used, and that is the MVC Model. We've control. Okay. Commonly this is called as MVC. This is based on a design pattern. Now MVC is a design pattern, it's not a framework, it's a design pattern. Now what is a design pattern? If you are wondering, I don't know whether it's there or for you or for the MSc it is there. Okay. Now what people have realized is, for a similar type of problems, everybody is writing the code in a one format. So it is, they are trying to extract the pattern in which the people write the code. Okay. They have scanned almost all program and they have checked how an experienced person is writing the code. There is you know very well, as the person gets experience, the way in which they develop the application will be different from what you are doing. So if you imagine, if there is a person with 25 years of the programming experience in Java, the way that person writes the program and the way you write the program will be very different. Okay? Today you write a variable in one format, tomorrow you will declare it somewhere else and other, but they are following some standard. Now how did they get that standard? They got it because of their own mistakes. How you learn from your mistake. So the mistake, the other word for the mistake is the experience. Their experience has taught them a lesson how to write the code, how to write a good code. So what is being done is, their code is not copy pasted. The way in which they write the code, how they start, how they call the method, and if there is an error, where they are taking it back. That step, they got it after their long experience. It's not 25, 50 years of experience they have got it. You have the good developers. Their experience are taken up. And what is being done is, people have studied the pattern in which they are writing. Remember, if it is, for example, if it is an accounting application, how a good developer is writing that accounting application. Not the juniors, the experienced one. Then they realize that everybody is trying to follow a same pattern, and this pattern is good because it handles the error. It is much easier to debug. It is much efficient. That pattern is absorbed out, and they have come up with. There are many 40 and above patterns are there, and if you look at the history, somebody did a research and he got with the idea of this design pattern and he published the paper. After that, everybody is using it. We are heavily using this pattern. Now, in a simple word, what is a design pattern is the best practices in the industry. So, the best practice, how they are writing. For a given problem, what is the best practice? What is the best solution that you are supposed to write? It's not the code. It's the way in which you write the code. It's not where you put the flower bracket and how many tabs you are going to press. It's not the one. When you call a method, and if there is an exception, where it is taking back, that logic, the clear logic is the design pattern. Okay, and MVC is one of the design pattern, and you will hear this word again and again in many ways, like a factory pattern, adapter pattern, and so on. I will tell you, all of them are a design pattern. If you don't get this idea, you can just take it as it's a best practice that is followed in the industry. Okay. The good thing about it is, once this is published, people went through it and they realized that how much mistake they were doing. The other juniors just realized that, okay, we were doing blunders. That is why our code was hard to debug and it was inefficient. If I would have followed that, it was much easier. So what this framework people have done is, they have studied many design patterns, the best practices, and they have taken all those best practices and they have put it in their framework. One of the best practice that is followed almost everywhere, there is a variation for this. For example, we have MVC and so on. There are many ways in which you can develop it. One of the initial one is the MVC, and almost every framework follows this MVC. Okay. The advantage, what is the main concept behind MVC is the separation of concern. So, meaning of saying separation of concern. the different pieces has to be separated out from each other. Which are those different pieces? The model, the view, and the control. These are the three different entities in a web related application, and they should not be mixed together. If you mix them together, it becomes very difficult to code them, as well as it becomes difficult to debug them if you end up in trouble, as well as tomorrow if you want to scale your application, if you want to enhance your application, it becomes extremely difficult. Okay, so what they said is separate the model, separate the view, separate the controller. Okay, now what is this model, what is this view, and what is this controller? So these are three pieces of the MVC. Model represents your data within your application, as well as the methods that are used to manipulate that data. So it represents the state of your application and how to change the state. So you know very well, you have an object, state of the object is decided by the variables or the fields, the values of the fields. Similarly, you have the state of your application that is decided by the model. The view is the screen, user interface, where the user interacts with the model. So you have the model separate, you have the view. View is separate. User interacts with the view. View does not carry any data of your application. View's work is to just show the output to the user or take the user gestures. That's the only thing view is supposed to do. It is not supposed to handle any business logic on its own. It has to just take the request, give it to the model, and whatever the output that model is giving, display to the user. Separation of concern. So view's work is to just show something to the user and get something from the user. After getting the values, what has to be done is taken care by the model. Now, what is the use of the controller? Model has the methods for changing the state. Which method has to be called? Which is the appropriate method has to be called? When that method has to be called? When the output has to be shown to the user? In other words, who is going to control the entire activity? And that is decided by the controller. So controller defines the behavior, how your program is going to work. Okay, so that is what is your MVC. So you have a model, we have a view, and we have a controller all together. So that is what is MVC. Let's look at this MVC. There are many other. This is one of the standard picture. Some people write it in the circle. It's all right, but it's just a separation of concern. Now let's look at what is there in the model. Okay, model represents the data. It also represents the business rule and how to make changes to the data. So that is what is there in the model. So it says, what is the data? When I say what is the data, I mean to say that where are you going to store the data? On which table, which database, which XML, which that part, the data part. How do you write it to the database? How do you retrieve it from the database? Which is the method that goes and writes onto the database, and which is the method that retrieves from the database? Okay, how do you calculate the average? How do you calculate the net pay? Or how do you calculate the total or whatever, the standard deviation, that thing? That's the business rule. Okay, that part is there in the model. Okay, whenever there is a change, so when you call a method, say insert, when you call a method called as insert into table, the data changes. When its data changes, it tells the view that I have changed the data. If you want, you make or refresh the content. Something has been changed, show the new values to the user. Again, it's not the work of the model to show the content, it's the view that's going to show the content. Again, if the view is interested in knowing the new values, you can at any time query the model to find out what are the new values which are there. Okay. Let's look at the model now. So what is there in the model? Model encapsulates the state, the data. Okay, it responds to the queries either by the view. The view can make a, this is your view. View can ask for the state query. What is the state of the data? So you have the data. What's the state? What is changed from my last? So I was showing something for half an hour. Is there any new changes? It can change. If there is any change, it can notify the changes. Also, it can receive a request from the controller for making changes. So what is the meaning of that? A controller can call insert into method, which is there in the model. So model has an insert into database, one method is there. Controller at appropriate time, controller can call that method. Or controller can call a method delete record. So model will do that deleting part. Controller will not do it. It's like controller is a supervisor. You know very well. Supervisors, if you seen in any company or anywhere, even in the construction site, supervisor will not do any work. They will ask others to do the work. Their work is to find out who is sitting idle, ask them to do some work. Okay. So that's the same thing. This controller is like a supervisor. It just goes to model and say, okay, I want this thing to be done. Do it. Once it is done, I'll go to view and tell them that that work is done. So that is what it is doing. The real work is not done. Okay. So that means the supervisors have no work. No. They are very tense. Why? Because they have to do the work as efficiently as possible. So supervisors are also doing some work. The controller is like a supervisor. It also does some work. Its work is to call in appropriate methods at the right time. Okay. Let's look at the other one. It exposes the application functionalities. Okay. So in other words, for example, I told you insert into delete all those methods so that somebody can call those methods, and whenever there is a change, it notifies the view. Let's go to the view now. What is the use of this view? View is used to access the data. Remember, view is the user interface. So if you have done a Swing application, the buttons, the menus, whatever you have created, all of them are view. Their work is to get the data and show it to the user, that's all. Logic is not there with the view. If somebody clicks on the update button, what has to be done? It's not my work. The view work is somebody clicked on update, that's all. It will go to the controller and just say, somebody clicked on update button, that's it. I don't know what has to be done. That is the only work of the view. Now you may be thinking, so what is the use of that view? View's work is to take the input and show it to the user. So why do you have to keep this view separate from the model? Why can't you club them together? Your views can change, and this is the only place where you will be absorbed in the industry. Most of the time, the data remains same, the database, the tables remain same. Nobody will change the database every now and then. But the way in which the values are shown to the user or the way in which they accept the values changes. The interface always changes. You have noticed, those who are using Windows, right from the Windows 98, things have not changed. You still have the start button. Maybe in the Windows 8 the things have changed. You still have, but again, the Windows 8 you can get there is a utility that will give you a start button. Start button is there. When you click on start button, it will show you the all the applications that are installed. Who knows that all the applications which are installed? It's a model. Model knows the state of your Windows. What is that start button? Start button or the start menu is just the view. View has changed. I don't know whether you were using Windows 2000 or Windows Vista or other Windows 7. The menu style has changed. The way in which the items are shown has changed. That's the view has changed. The model is still the same. So people are fascinated by the new look of Windows. But what is changed? It's only the view that has been changed. behind the scene it is the same thing. It's the same model that is doing the work. Okay, so the other work that is done by the view is to forward the gesture to the controller. So when somebody clicks on the button, it is. So this is in case of the GUI application. In case of the web application, the work of the view is to get that request, get or post request, and send it to the controller. So this is what is the work of the view. So what does the view do? Renders the model. It displays the model. So you may show it in a bar diagram today. Tomorrow you may show it in a pie chart, or maybe day after tomorrow you may show it in the scattered diagram. The view, way in which the values are shown as changed, but the value still remains same. Okay. Request the update if they require some update. Okay. If the user has clicked on any button, that's a gesture. It sends that gesture information to the controller and allows the controller to select a view. So if the user is not happy with the one menu, and if the user says I want to see something else, user goes to the other form, then other view has to be changed. In an application, there will be many views. Now let's go to the last part, and that is the controller. Controller defines the behavior, how your application will behave. Whenever a view sends a gesture to the controller, it interprets what the user wants to do. Then based on the gesture or based on the request, it will go to the appropriate method within the model and it will activate those methods. So its work is to receive the request, look into the request, what the user wanted to do, go to the model, call the appropriate method in the model, give all the data that it has received from the view to the model and say, okay, you update it. Once your work is done, go back to the view and show something to this. Either go back to the same view or go back to some other view and show the display. For example, if you are registering for an online course, you say a username or your register number, name and other things. They are all the data, and you say register. You get that thing. Okay, the gesture is register. This is the data. It will go to a appropriate model and say do this registration. Once the registration is completed, go to a view and show registration. Congratulations, your registration is successful. So you get from one view, it goes, and some other view is shown to the user. So that is what is being done. Okay. Your gesture could be like a user command. So whenever, most of the time, if gestures are nothing but the switch statements. So, or if statement. If the gesture is this, do this. If else, if the gesture is something else, do the other part. Or a switch statement. That is what is usually done. Okay. In almost all frameworks, there will be, not the modern one, in the olden days, there is only one controller. So there is only one person who receives the request. There can be many views. There can be many methods within the model. Okay, there is only one who is taking the entire responsibility of interacting with the user and selecting the appropriate view that can be shown to the user. So you have the controller. Controllers define the behavior of the application. It maps the user action to the model updates. So if the user says delete, it will call a delete method in the model. It will not go and do it. It will just tell the model, do this deletion part. It's the work of the model. After the work is completed, it will select the appropriate response, that is appropriate view. Okay. There is one for each functionalities. What's the meaning of saying one for each functionality? For example, if you have a controller, when I say if there is one controller, it's not for the entire application. You can't have one controller. Then what will happen is when there are 1,000 requests, the controller will go down, and then onwards your application will not behave. For an individual step, there will be a controller. For example, for a HR department, if you take HR department, the people who are working in the HR department will interact with that software. All the other employees within the organization will also interact with the application software. For example, if I want to get a leave, then I will go to the HR software and apply for the leave. This is an employee who is doing it. A manager who is working in the HR department will see how many people have applied for the leave, and they will either grant the leave or deny the leave. So there are two type of users, one from the HR department, one outside the HR department. We can think of having two controllers. One controller is handling the request for the external users, other controller handling the request for the internal users. So let's look at how the things work. You are already familiar with this word called as event. So whenever an event activates a controller, controller goes and calls the appropriate methods within the model. Model gets updated. Based on the updates, the appropriate views are changed. Okay, so this is what is going to happen. The controller can also tell the model that this is the view that you are supposed to activate and show it to the user. Let's look at a simple the spinner control that you might have used either in Java or in Visual Basic. How it goes. Now all of you are familiar. The spinner button is, if you click on the top button, the number increases. If you click on the down button, the number decreases. So this is the spinner button. Now where is the view? View is this area that shows you the number, and these two buttons that help you to increment or decrement the values. When somebody clicks on this increment or decrement button, a gesture is trapped by the view. It sends it to an action listener. We are already written some program in Java. So whenever there is a event, there must be an action listener who is listening to the appropriate event. And that is what is your controller. So controller just listen to the up or down button click event. Once that event is done, if it is a up event, it will go to this area. Remember, this is the value that is shown. This is the model. Model has the data. It goes to the model. If it is a up button, it will increment the value of the model. If it is a down, it will decrement the model. After doing increment or decrement, it will then go back to the appropriate view and displays it back. Now there is the other one. User can also directly, some of you might have done, you can click here, delete this value and enter a new value and press enter. Okay. So this is the text box altogether. You can remove, press a click inside, press the backspace, type some other number and press enter. In that case, that event is handled by one more controller that will listen to the enter event and then make the appropriate changes to the model. So we have two controller that is doing it. Okay. For one particular functionality, we can think of having one controller. Now let's look at some other application. Let's assume that we have written a program in Java Swing, and we have some values here, and there are two views. So the user says, I want to view it in the bar diagram. So this view is captured by the controller. It will go to the appropriate form, which is the view, and it says these are the values, show it in the bar diagram. If the user says no, I don't want to see this in the form of a bar diagram, the user clicks on the second button. This is a gesture from the user. It goes to the controller. Controller says, now this is the different form that needs to be activated. These values will be stored in the model. Now coming back to the JavaEE, where is this view, where is this model, and where is this controller? Which part is spread across the different pieces? When it comes to the JavaEE, we have the client here. That's a web browser which will interact with the clients. So you get a web page with buttons and with menus and with all the things. That is it. You click on a button, a view gets generated. Some JSP page is there that shows a button, that shows a form with button, one or two buttons. That's the view. When you click on one of the buttons, who is going to handle that thing? This is handled by a controller. Now, which part of the JavaEE is the controller? The controller is the servlet. The servlet receives the gesture. Okay. Now, where is the model? The model is taken care in the business layer, and in the business layer we have EJB, Enterprise Java Base. We have not seen that thing. We will see that in the later classes. Behind the scene, you may have some data tier that interacts with the database. So, what is View? View is a JSP page. What is a controller in general? Which part is a controller? Servlet is a controller. Where is the model? EJB is the model. We have not seen EJB, but as of now, EJB will be your model. So, JSP is your view, servlet is your controller, EJB will be your model. Okay, so this is how it goes, always. Okay, so this is the simple idea. All your JSP or even the HTML or the view which takes the request, it gives it to a servlet, usually called as a controller. The controller or the servlet will not do the work on its own. It will call appropriate method inside EJB that will interact with the database or some other components, and once the processing is done, it comes back to the servlet, and the servlet will select the appropriate JSP page to show the result back to the user. So this is the diagram of MVC. So you get a request, it goes to a servlet. Servlet activates one of the model. One of the model is an EJB. In this case, only ordinary bean is been shown. Instantiate, ask it to do some work. It will go to an appropriate JSP and tell the JSP, you are the view. Whatever the result that is coming out of this bean, show it to the user. Now there are two different ways in which this model has been generated. We have the model 1 and model 2. Okay, MVC 1 and MVC 2. MVC 1 was used in olden days. Now it has been upgraded to MVC 2. Okay. What is MVC model 1? In the olden days, they didn't have the concept of the servlet coming into picture. So what they used to do is the JSP itself was acting like a controller. So JSP used to receive the request and then call the appropriate bean to do the work. Okay. What's the advantage over here is you are actually mixing the view, that is the control logic, along with the view. For a simple application, this is good, but as the application becomes larger, the scaling is a problem because you will be mixing the view along with the controller, and somewhere or other place they are going to intermix and they are going to create a problem. But still, it is the one of the preferred method for a simple application. For a larger application, we have the MVC model 2, which is heavily being used up. Here what we have is the controller is taken care by a separate unit altogether, and that's a servlet. And the view is taken care by the JSP, whereas the business logic or the model is the EJB. What is shown here is a Java bean, ordinary Java bean. It could also be a EJB. Now, what is the advantage? Advantage is here is that we have every 3 pieces in a separate place. So, if you tomorrow, if you are not happy with the controller, remove the servlet, put a new servlet there. If you are not happy with one of the view, take the JSP page or put it back. Others are not affected. So, if you take one JSP page, entire application will not crash because only one JSP is having a problem. If you change one of the EJB or one of the model component, only that part is getting affected. Now, this is very crucial because imagine you have a banking software and bank comes out with a new scheme. So, you are writing a program. Now, you want to introduce that new scheme. That does not mean that you are going to halt the entire banking software altogether. You will only modify what is required. So, only one piece has been changed. Others updating the account, checking the balance in the account, all of them are not affected. They will go on their own if you have not touched them. Only one part, only the new scheme part has changed.